It's the strangest things that bring old memories back. Sometimes it's a song on the radio, Patsy Cline, usually. Sometimes it's the creak of the screen door in summer, or the way sunlight hits the kitchen floor in late afternoon. But today it was the smell of apple pie. I pulled one out of the oven. The crust was just tin and golden, and the cinnamon started to rise up and wrap around the whole house, like a memory itself. And land sakes alive, it took me straight back to 1961. I was 17, barefoot in my mama's kitchen in El Reno, Oklahoma. We didn't have air conditioning back then, just the hum of the fan and a tall glass of sweet tea on the counter. I was wearing a pale yellow dress I'd made myself. Hem was crooked, but I thought I looked something fancy. I remember I had my hair up in curlers and a whole lot of dreams. Back in my day, girls like me didn't have big plans. Not really, but I had a wild little thought in my head that maybe, just maybe, I'd get out west someday, see the ocean, write poetry, fall in love like they did in the movies. Not just marry some boy and keep house like Mama did. But well, that's how we did it in those days. You didn't go looking for fairy tales, you made do with what you had. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. We had a roof over our heads, food on the table, kids who turned out all right. That's more than most, I reckon. But still, every once in a while, when the house gets real quiet and the pie's cooling on the counter, a little ache creeps up in me. A kind of ache that doesn't shout, it just whispers. You never really asked if you were loved, did you? And that's what's been sitting heavy on me lately. See, I lived with a man named Harold Mercer for 45 years. We had 2 beautiful children together. We shared morning coffees, grocery lists, bills, flu seasons, birthdays, a Christmas hymn every December. And I thought that meant something. I thought it had to mean love. But then, after he passed, Lord have mercy, I found something. Something that's been burning a hole in my chest ever since. I ain't told many folks about it. Not because I'm ashamed, but because, well, you young folks wouldn't understand. Back then, you didn't ask certain questions. You just kept things going. You kept the plate spinning. That was just the way things were back then. But now I'm 81. And I'm tired of carrying this thing by myself. And truth be told, I think there's a lesson in it. Not just for me, but for somebody out there listening. Maybe for you. So, if you've got a minute, pour yourself a cup of tea, pull up a chair. I'm gonna tell you a story I've never told out loud before. It's about a girl who thought patience was love. About a man who never raised his voice, but never raised his heart either. And about a notebook I found after he was gone, one that changed everything I thought I knew. And if you're sitting there thinking this sounds like just another sad story, well, I'll tell you what, stick around. You might just be surprised by where it ends. Tell me something. Have you ever looked back on your life and realized you might have misunderstood what love really was? I grew up in a little town called El Reno, Oklahoma, just west of Oklahoma City, where the land stretches wide and flat like the sky itself forgot how to stop. The wind was always blowing, not loud, not wild, just constant. It had a way of humming through the wheat fields and around the front porch like it was singing to itself. And when you're a little girl with big eyes and not much to your name, that wind feels like a promise. Like someday it might carry you somewhere else. Mama used to say I was quiet, but always thinking dot. I reckon she was right. I wasn't the loud one. I wasn't the kind to stir up trouble or raise a fuss. I was the girl who helped shell peas on the porch, who remembered how everyone liked their cornbread, who listened more than she spoke. I believed that if you were kind and useful, life would be kind in return. That's just how we were raised. You worked hard. You didn't ask for more than your share. And you always said thank you even when your heart was aching. My daddy worked for the railroad, gone more often than not, but when he was home, he brought the smell of coal smoke and leather boots with him. He wasn't a tender man, but he meant well. Mama was softer, always humming hymns while she cooked, patting flour onto the counter like it was a baby's back. She didn't go in for big emotions, but when she held your hand, it stayed held a while. Back then, Sunday dinner was sacred. Fried chicken, green beans cooked in bacon fat, biscuits with apple butter. The whole family around the table, passing dishes, talking over each other. That was our world. That was the rhythm of life, predictable, sturdy, built like an old porch swing that squeaks but never breaks. As a girl, I spent hours looking out the window, dreaming of things I didn't even have names for. I'd see pictures of the Pacific Ocean in old magazines and wonder what saltwater smelled like. I'd hear stories of California and imagine myself there, walking with the wind in my hair, not a care in the world. I started writing poems in a little notebook I kept under my mattress. Nothing fancy, just little lines about light and longing and skies too big to stay under. I learned to sew from my Aunt Cora. She said if a girl could stitch a hem straight, she could survive anything. So I stitched. I made my own dresses, cut from feed socks and discount bolts Mama found in town. I didn't mind. There was a kind of quiet pride in wearing something you made with your own two hands. I didn't know much about love back then. I'd seen it in the movies, sure, all that kissing in the rain and crying into pillows, but in our house, love wasn't loud. It was in clean clothes folded neat. A pie cooled for someone who didn't ask for it. A hand rested on a shoulder while you prayed. I thought that was all it needed to be. By the time I turned 16, I figured my life would go like Mama's. I'd marry someone decent, raise a couple kids, maybe teach Sunday school. I didn't think I'd change the world, but I wanted to be good. Good and true. I believed, really believed, that if you gave your heart gently and didn't ask for too much, someone would take care of it. That people, deep down, always meant well. That kindness was the currency of real love. That if you waited long enough, someone would come home to you. But sometimes they don't. And sometimes they do, but their heart never unpacks its bags. You just don't know that until much, much later. I still remember the first time I saw Harold Mercer. It was a Tuesday. I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but it does. A Tuesday in early September, 1963. The air still held a bit of summer, but the shadows were already getting longer. I'd just turned 19, working the switchboard at the Bell telephone office on Main Street. Had my hair pinned up, blouse starched just so. I was savon up for a new pair of pumps and still writing poems on lunch breaks, folded up and tucked behind the salt shaker at May's Diner, where I ate pie with my girlfriends after our shifts. Harold came in through the front door of the building with a leather briefcase and a pressed shirt that didn't have a wrinkle on it. He wasn't tall, not particularly handsome in the way girls whispered about, but there was something steady about him. Quiet, polished, like he belonged to some other, neater part of the world. I remember he nodded to the receptionist, adjusted his glasses, and walked past without a word. Didn't even glance my way. And yet, Lord have mercy, something in my chest fluttered like a sparrow in a box. I couldn't tell you what it was. He hadn't done anything, hadn't said anything, but still, my heart gave this little tug, like it had noticed something before my mind caught up. I didn't tell anyone, of course. That wasn't how girls were raised in El Reno. You didn't chase boys. You just waited politely for them to notice you. It turns out, he wasn't just passing through. He'd taken a job at the accounting firm 2 floors up. Word was, he'd moved from Tulsa, his mama had passed, and he was looking to start fresh. No brothers, no sisters. a man all on his own. And maybe I thought, maybe that's what I saw in him, that quiet loneliness hanging around his collar. I recognized it. I'd carried that kind of silence myself. He started coming into the diner for lunch. Always ordered meatloaf. Sat by the window. Read the paper. Never looked rushed. One day, I found myself at the counter next to him. I didn't even mean to, it just happened. He glanced up, gave a small nod, then went right back to his coffee. I thought, well, that's that. But then, a moment later, he said, "You work the switchboard, right? You're the one with the soft voice." I nearly dropped my fork. We talked for 7 minutes. I counted. Not that day, but later. I played it back in my head like a record I didn't want to scratch. He said he liked things quiet. Said his life had been full of noise and nonsense, and he was trying to keep it simple now. I told him I liked poems, and he said, "Poems are just organized feelings. That's useful." It wasn't romantic, not the way I'd read about, but it felt like someone had noticed I was there. After that, he'd nod more often, sometimes even smile. Small, but enough. And one day, he walked me to my bus stop. It was cold that morning, and I didn't have gloves. He didn't offer his coat. That wasn't his way. But he stood there with me, quiet, hands in his pockets, not saying a word. And for some reason, I thought, this is a man who won't leave. Not because he's swept away, but because he's planted. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that stillness between us, was the start of it all. The start of 45 years of calm, measured silence. And maybe I mistook stillness for love. But at 19, all I knew was that I wanted to be chosen. Not chased, not swept off my feet, just quietly, gently chosen. And Harold Mercer, he chose me. Marrying Harold wasn't a big affair. Just a small ceremony in the church down on Maple. My mama cried, more from relief than sentiment, I think, and my daddy shook Harold's hand like he was passing over responsibility for a borrowed tool. I wore a borrowed dress and a corsage from the Piggly Wiggly floral counter. We didn't have much, but I remember feeling steady, like I was doing what I was supposed to, like I was finally settling into something that would last. We moved to Tulsa not long after. Harold had gotten a proper position as a junior accountant. That was a big deal for us. First time I'd ever lived outside El Reno. The apartment was small, just 1 bedroom and a narrow galley kitchen, but I kept it neat as a pin. Harold liked things tidy. Liked quiet, too. I tried not to play the radio too loud, and I stopped writing my poems out where he could see, and he never said he didn't like them, exactly. But one time he read one and said, "That's a lot of feeling for one piece of paper." After that, I just didn't bring it up again. At first, I figured it was just adjustment. 2 people learning how to live in the same space. You tell yourself it's normal, that love's not about fireworks and fluttering, but about building a rhythm. And we did build a rhythm of sorts. I made meatloaf on Tuesdays, folded his socks the way he liked, and he always paid the bills on time. We didn't fight, not really. Harold wasn't the yelling kind. But the silences got longer. Not angry silences, just empty ones. Then came the miscarriage. I was 22. We'd only just found out I was pregnant when I lost it. It happened fast, on a rainy Sunday morning. I woke up with a pain in my lower back, and by the time we made it to the clinic, there wasn't much to be done. I remember laying there holding my breath so I wouldn't cry too loud, because Harold was sitting in the waiting room, probably going over bank statements in his head. When the doctor told us, Harold didn't say much. He just nodded and said, "Well, maybe next time." That was it. No hand squeeze. No look in the eyes. Just those 4 words. And Lord help me, I nodded back. Like I agreed. Like I was fine. But I wasn't fine. I felt like something had been taken from me and replaced with a cold emptiness I didn't know what to do with. I tried to talk to Mama on the phone a week later, but all she said was, "You just rest up now. God knows best." That was all the comfort she had. We didn't talk about those things back then. We just bore them quietly. But that was the first time I remember feeling angry. Not at Harold. Not even at God. At myself. For not feeling more. For not demanding more. For not crying in front of anyone. I remember sitting in the bathroom with the water running so he wouldn't hear me sobbing into a towel. That was the first time I realized I was alone, even with someone sitting 5 feet away. The trouble was, I didn't know how to say it. I didn't have the words, or maybe I'd learned too well that women like me weren't supposed to need too much. That patience was a virtue and silence was strength. That if you just kept going, things would work out. That was the lie, I think. The one I fed myself day after day. And still I stayed. Because where else would I go? Who would I be without this quiet life we'd built? That's when the dilemma began. The one I carried for years. Was I being strong, or just disappearing slowly? Truth is, I didn't know then. I just kept cooking dinner at 6 and praying over closed doors. It was a Tuesday again. Funny how life circles back like that. Tuesdays were never special, not in our house. Just me, Loaf, and the local news, and Harold settling into his recliner with the same crossword puzzle book he'd been using for years. But this Tuesday, in March of 2021, everything changed. Harold had passed 2 months earlier. Stroke. Quick. I was there, standing at the kitchen sink when I heard the coffee cup hit the floor. I turned around, and he was already gone. Just like that. 45 years of routine, of quiet dinners and unspoken thoughts, ended with a single sound of porcelain breaking on tile. After the funeral, I didn't touch much of his things. Couldn't bring myself to. His chair stayed where it always was, his slippers still tucked beneath the bed. I moved like a ghost for weeks, making toast I wouldn't eat and sitting through church without hearing a word. You'd think after all those years, I'd know exactly what to feel. But I didn't. It wasn't grief, not really. Not the kind that comes from losing love. It was more like the silence got heavier, thicker, like the house was suddenly filled with everything we never said. And then, one afternoon, I opened the hallway closet. I was looking for the old quilt to donate to the church drive, but I reached up and my hand brushed a cardboard box I didn't recognize, tucked behind the suitcases, dusty like it hadn't been touched in years. I pulled it down, and inside, tax documents, bank statements, old utility bills, and one leather-bound notebook. It was worn smooth along the edges, Harold's name written in small, careful letters on the inside cover. He always had neat handwriting. Efficient. I sat down on the floor, cross-legged like I hadn't done in decades, and I opened it to the first page. I never loved her. That was the first sentence, written in black ink, underlined once. I stared at it for a long time, thinking maybe it was about someone else. Maybe an old flame, or a story he was writing, or a dream he'd once had. But no, the next line said my name. I married Edna because I couldn't stand the idea of being alone. And then the rest of it, pages and pages of thoughts, reflections, cold truths dressed up in neat sentences. He wrote about duty, about doing what was expected, about how he thought affection was unnecessary, about how he figured I'd never ask and he never had to offer. He even called our life a manageable arrangement. I remember that exact phrase, a manageable arrangement. I didn't cry, not at first. I didn't scream or tear pages or curse the heavens. I just sat there, The air in the house went real still. Like everything, even the walls, was holding its breath. I remember looking at the little clock on the hall table. 3:12 p.m. That's when time stopped for me. That's the moment everything I thought I knew, everything I'd built my life around, cracked wide open. And yet, it wasn't heartbreak I felt. Not exactly. It was like something inside me finally gave way. Like I'd been holding up a heavy roof for 45 years without knowing it, and suddenly it collapsed, and I was free to breathe again. I whispered I didn't deserve that. Not to anyone in particular. Just to the air, to God maybe. My voice sounded small, like it belonged to someone else. And then I said it again, louder. I didn't deserve that, and I knew it was true. I'd lived a life inside someone else's silence. I gave love, quietly, faithfully, completely, to a man who never truly received it. And in that moment, sitting on the floor with his words burning into my hands, I realized something else too. I was still here, and for the first time in a long time, I asked myself, "Now what, Edna? What do you want?" And wouldn't you know it, I didn't have an answer. Not yet, but Lord have mercy. I finally knew I was allowed to ask. The strange thing about grief, the real kind, the kind that doesn't come with casseroles and condolences, is how quiet it is. Not silent, just hushed, like the world is holding its breath around you, waiting to see what you'll do next. After I found that notebook, I didn't tell anyone. Not right away. I put it back in the box, slid the box back onto the closet shelf, and closed the door. I didn't even tell the kids when they called to check in. What could I say? Your daddy never loved me. Bless his soul. What kind of mother says that? So I just kept going. The house felt different after that. Colder even when the sun came in. I stopped cooking proper meals. Ate toast for dinner. Sometimes just crackers. Didn't set the table. What was the point? There was no one to sit across from, and truth be told, I'd already sat across from silence for 45 years. I just hadn't known how empty it really was. The days stretched long. I stopped watching the clock. Stopped wearing my watch. The television was on most of the time, not because I cared what was on it, just so I didn't have to sit in that big hollow silence. I folded laundry I hadn't worn. I dusted books I hadn't opened in years. I moved from room to room like a ghost, polite and quiet, just passing through. You'd think I would have felt rage, or heartbreak, or betrayal. And maybe in little ways I did, but mostly I felt blank. Like someone had erased the chalkboard of my life, and I was left staring at the smudges. I looked at old pictures of us, me smiling, him standing beside me like a statue, and I wondered, who were we? What did I really know? It's a funny thing when your past turns into a stranger. I stopped going to church for a while. Couldn't sit there with all that talk of love and grace without feeling like I'd been the fool in the story. I didn't want to bow my head while everyone else whispered prayers. My heart was too loud for whispering, too confused. I still believed in God, sure, but I didn't know what I believed about people anymore, especially myself. I started asking questions I'd never dared speak out loud before. Had I wasted my life? Had I ignored the signs? Had I let myself shrink just to keep the peace? And worst of all, was I too late to become someone else? That's when the loneliness really set in, not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from realizing you've always been. I missed things I didn't know I missed. Not Harold himself, but the idea of him. The shape his presence gave to my days. Even the rituals, the 6 o'clock dinners, the grocery lists, the polite goodnights. When you build a life around another person, even their absence keeps a kind of rhythm. But once the illusion breaks, even the echo disappears. I'd sit in the living room, looking at that empty recliner, and feel not sadness, but weightlessness, like I'd been untethered. And in some ways, that was more frightening than grief, because at least grief has direction. But this was drifting. I didn't know who I was without his silence to wrap myself around. Didn't know what kind of woman I was now that the truth was out. But somewhere, deep down, I felt a shift. Not a loud one. Just a whisper like the wind outside my childhood window. The kind that doesn't knock you over, but invites you to stand up. I wasn't ready yet. Not to fight. Not to heal. Not even to hope. But I was listening. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something. It started with a sweater. Funny, isn't it? After everything, the notebook, the silence, the 45 years of quiet endurance, the thing that woke me up wasn't a sermon or a sign from heaven. It was an orange sweater. I found it while cleaning out the closet one afternoon. The same closet where I'd found Harold's notebook. I hadn't meant to be in there again, but I was looking for my church hat, hadn't worn it in a while, and figured maybe I ought to try. But there it was, folded way in the back of the shelf, bright orange, hand-knit, soft as a whisper. I'd bought it years ago on sale, of course. I remembered the clerk saying how good it looked with my hair. But when I brought it home, Harold had glanced at it and said, "That's a bit loud, don't you think?" So I never wore it. Not once. That day, I pulled it down and held it to my chest. It was warm, smelled a little of cedar and lavender. And, for reasons I can't explain, I slipped it on. I looked in the mirror. And for the first time in a long, long while, I didn't see someone trying to disappear. I saw a woman who had been polite her whole life. A woman who'd waited her turn, kept the peace, folded her hands, and swallowed her voice. And suddenly, I didn't want to be quiet anymore. That afternoon, I went outside and trimmed the rose bushes. I waved to my neighbor, Irene, and asked if she wanted to come over for coffee later. I made cinnamon rolls from scratch. Hadn't done that in years. She sat at my kitchen table, looked at the sweater, and said, "Well, Edna Louise Mercer, look at you." It wasn't just the sweater. It was something in me, like the tiniest green shoot pushing up through hard dirt. That week, I found my old poetry notebook, the one I used to hide behind the salt shaker at May's Diner. I flipped through it, yellowed pages and ink faded like a long-forgotten song. And then, Lord help me, I picked up a pen. At first, the words came slow. One line here, a thought there. But it felt like breathing again, like I was speaking in a voice that had never stopped echoing inside me, just waiting for permission. I heard about a little poetry contest at the public library. Nothing big, just a share your words night for local writers. I almost didn't go. I had my coat on, then off again. My hands were shaking, just trying to decide. But I heard Mama's voice in the back of my mind. If you're scared, it means it matters. So I went. I read a poem called I Loved Anyway. It wasn't fancy. Just a few verses about a life built on quiet acts of love, even when they weren't returned. When I finished, the room was real still. Then someone clapped. Then another. A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. And I thought, maybe I ain't the only one who's ever lived a quiet heartbreak. When I walked home that night, the stars were out. And I looked up and said, not to anyone in particular, I'm still here. That was the night I started believing I had a second chance. Not at love, maybe not the kind I once dreamed of, but at being. At breathing full. At wearing orange sweaters and saying what I feel without waiting for permission. Hope doesn't always come with trumpets. Sometimes it shows up in soft yarn and strangers clapping in a library basement. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just begin again. There's a kind of freedom that don't come with wings or money or wide open roads. It comes in the form of acceptance. Not the kind where you give up, no ma'am, but the kind where you finally stop fighting ghosts and just let yourself be. It took me a long time to get there. One morning, not long after the poetry reading, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom, our bedroom, the one Harold and I had shared for over 4 decades, and I looked around. Same bed, same dresser, same curtains I'd picked out in 1989. His slippers were still tucked beneath the bench. His aftershave still sitting on the shelf, even though he hadn't used it in months before he passed. And it hit me, this room wasn't mine. Not really. It had been a shared space, yes, but mostly it had been a shrine to routine. A place where silence hung like wallpaper. And I realized I didn't want to sleep in that anymore. I didn't want to keep living in the same sentences that had caged me for years. So I did something I'd never done before. I moved the bed, pushed it right up under the window so the morning light would hit me first thing. I opened every drawer, took out what I didn't need, and filled a big donation box. I folded up Harold's things, not in anger, not in bitterness, but with care. I kept one flannel shirt, the gray one he used to wear when mowing the lawn, and I laid it in the hope chest. The rust I let go. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, looked out the window, and whispered, I forgive you. And Lord, the tears came like rain on dry soil. Not because I excused what he'd done, not because it didn't hurt, but because I was finally ready to stop holding it, to stop letting his silence be the story of my life. I forgave him for not knowing how to love me. I forgave myself for waiting so long to realize I deserved more. That was the moment I chose to keep living, not out of habit, but on purpose. I started putting color around the house. Bright yellow cushions, a turquoise dish towel, a pink geranium by the kitchen sink. I got rid of the old recliner and bought a new chair, soft and wide, where I read in the afternoons with the window open. I started walking to the library once a week, even when my knees ached. I sent Becky a poem I'd written. She called me crying, said she'd never known I had that in me. I told her, neither did I. But the biggest change wasn't the house. It was how I talked to myself. I stopped saying you should have known better. I started saying, you did your best. I stopped asking, why didn't he love me? And started asking, how can I love me now? And I tell you this because maybe someone out there needs to hear it. You can survive a life that didn't love you back. You can forgive what you'll never forget. And you can decide, right here, right now, that you still deserve joy. I ain't the same woman who married Harold Mercer. I'm not even the woman who found his notebook. I'm someone new. Someone quieter, maybe, but stronger, truer. And I chose to live the rest of my life not as a widow, not as a victim, not as a woman left behind, but as a woman who made it through. No more pretending, no more waiting. Just me, still here, still breathing, and finally free. Sometimes I sit out on the porch in the evenings, sweet tea in hand, and I think about how many things in life look like love until you hold them up to the light. Kindness, routine, loyalty, they can all pass for love if you've never been taught to ask for more. And for a long time, I didn't. I thought being chosen, even quietly, was enough. I thought love was patience and silence was strength. I thought if I just kept serving it warm, kept saying, yes, dear, and folding his shirts just right, it'd all mean something deeper. But love, real love, ain't quiet because it's afraid to speak. It's quiet because it listens. It's not the absence of trouble, it's the presence of care. And Lord knows, I didn't learn that in my 20s. I didn't even learn it in my 40s. I learned it when I was 81, wearing an orange sweater and reading poetry to strangers who clapped like I'd said something holy. I used to believe that giving love was enough, that if I gave it long enough, faithfully enough, quietly enough, someone would meet me there. But the truth is, you can pour and pour and pour and still never be held. I don't regret love and Harold. Not anymore. I think, in his own way, he tried. Or maybe he just showed up the only way he knew how. But I understand now that love you give in silence becomes a kind of prayer you whisper only to yourself. And sometimes it gets answered. And sometimes it doesn't. But that don't mean the prayer was wasted. What I've come to understand is this. Loving someone who cannot love you back does not make you foolish, it makes you brave. It takes courage to keep your heart open when no one meets you halfway. It takes strength to build a life out of thin air and kindness. And if that's you, if you've been carrying your love all by yourself, I want you to know, I see you. And I'm proud of you. You don't have to stay in the waiting room of someone else's affection. You don't have to keep setting the table, hoping they'll show up with more than empty eyes. Life's too short and too long to wait for someone to see you when you could be seeing it yourself. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying throw it all away the first time things get hard. We may do with what we had, and there's dignity in that. But there's also a line, and I want every woman, every soul, to know they have permission to draw it. You can be gentle and still say enough. You can be faithful and still want more. You can be kind and still leave. And if you choose to stay, stay with your eyes open. Don't lose yourself trying to keep something alive that stopped breathing a long time ago. I spent a lifetime mistaken quiet for safety. But now I know the safest place is wherever your soul is heard. So, if you're sitting there wondering if it's time to speak, to leave, to begin, to breathe, I'll say this. Maybe it is. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for someone to love you the way you've always loved them. Maybe it's time to wear the orange sweater. Maybe it's time to come home to yourself. That's not just a lesson. That's a truth I bought with years. And if it helps you skip a little pain or wake up just a day sooner, then it was worth every quiet night I spent wondering why I didn't feel whole. I do now, not because someone made me whole, but because I stopped thinking I needed to be half of anything. And maybe it's your turn. Well now, here we are. You and me, sitting together on this porch made of stories, some sweet, some bitter, but all mine to share with you. I hope by now you felt a little piece of what I carried for so long. The waiting, the loving, the losing, and the finning again. It's been a long walk, hasn't it? I want to ask you something, straight from this old heart of mine. Tell me, what do you think? Do you believe real love, the kind that changes you, shapes your days, keeps you up at night, should always find its way back? Should it circle round like the wind over the prairie, never leaving quite for good? Or is love sometimes just a lesson, a season, a quiet thing that teaches us how to be brave and then slips away? I ask because this story, it ain't just about me and Harold. It's about all of us. About those moments we hold on to, those silences we fill with hope, and those truths we whisper when no one's listening. It's about the love we give, whether it's returned or not, and how that love shapes who we become. Sometimes I think about Harold. I wonder if he ever knew how much I loved him. Maybe he did. Maybe that was his way. Maybe, just maybe, he remembers, in some quiet corner of his soul, all the years we shared. I like to think so. And sometimes, when the evening wind picks up and rustles the curtains, I swear I hear the soft creak of that old screen door opening. Like he's coming back just for a minute to say, Edna, you were bigger than you ever knew. So here's what I want you to carry with you, wherever your journey takes you. Love isn't always what we dream it to be. It's messy, imperfect, and sometimes it breaks us before it heals us. But in every moment of that mess and that pain, there's a chance to learn, to grow, to find the pieces of yourself you didn't know were missing. Don't be afraid to look for love in unexpected places. And don't be ashamed to walk away from it when it's not right. And above all, never forget that the deepest love you'll ever need is the one you give yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, for sharing this time with me. I hope it brings you a little comfort, a little courage, and maybe, just maybe, a little light in the quiet moments. So I'll leave you with this question, one I ask myself more times than I can count. Do you believe that true love always finds its way back? I wonder, and sometimes I think it just might. And with that, I'll pour another cup of tea and sit back, watching the stars come out one by one. Thank you, darling, for being here with me. Until next time.